The Orphans of Simitra. Chapter 13. A Lift in the Night. Lorry. You can believe it or not, as you like, Porphyros, but I've just seen a truck as high as a house and as wide as that. Fantastic. Where? At Kruinen. It's come from Osterberg. A terrific truck, 25 tons. You'll never guess where it's going. How do you expect me to? There was a big F on the rear number plate. A French truck, Porphyros exclaimed. Yes, a French one, and going direct to Paris. It was loaded with seed potatoes, and stopped at the service station for minor repairs. It will be back again. A French truck. 4 weeks now Porphyros had been thinking of that vast unknown country. France, the land of agreeable travelers living in trailers, the land where Mina would have been less unhappy, where maybe she was to be found if his sister were alive. It was in a country like France that reminded them of their own, a country where olives and rosemary grew. A French truck, said Porphyros. And you say it will pass this way again? His deep sigh betrayed his longing. It was December now. Johanna had torn 50 pages from the calendar in the kitchen since the day Mina disappeared. As far as everyone knew, Porphyros had thrown off his terrible grief and was much the same as he had always been. He joined in the games of the other children, went back to the garage at Kruinen, and took fresh pleasure in cutting out more cars from the newspapers to pinned up by his bed. But appearances were deceptive. Porphyros had forgotten nothing. If Mina were not dead, he must go and look for her. That evening he could think of nothing but the French truck that had traveled across the Gutheron Peninsula. An idea was growing in his mind, one that did not need the Greek sun to bring it quickly to maturity. Every day as he came out of school, he pedaled along in the deepening night to Kruinen, to find out when this marvelous truck would pass through the village again. No one took much notice of these heavy transports, since they were familiar sights in the region. At last, one afternoon the garage owner said to him, "What a pity, Porphyros. If you'd been here half an hour ago, you would have seen the famous truck you've been plaguing me about." Porphyros felt his cheeks grow pale. "It's gone. It went straight through to Osterberg, to pick up a load." The boy breathed again. "So I'll be able to see it on the return journey?" "Indeed you won't. It's scheduled to pass through late this evening or tonight. Heavy truck like that are just like trains on the road in all weathers, and all hours of the day and night." Porphyros asked no more questions. He puttered about in the garage a little longer, wiping up patches of grease here and there, after which he got on his bicycle and returned to the farm. All through supper he was preoccupied and hardly said a word. Fortunately, Pete had not gone with him to the garage, so there was no risk of his mentioning the truck, since he did not know that it would be passing through. "You're not very talkative tonight," Mrs. Van Hoolen remarked. Porphyros put aside his problems and began to tell them how he had seen a new type of tractor at Kruinen, which was true, a much more practical proposition than a certain one that had taken him for a ride over the meadows. When the meal was finished, he kissed in turn, and according to Rachel, Mrs. Van Hoolen, Johanna and Pete shook hands with Mr. Van Hoolen, and went up to his room. He was going, yes, he was going, but it would be a wrench. He had been in Holland for almost a year, and found it a welcoming country in spite of its gloomy skies. At the farm, he had been taken into the family, been a brother to Johanna and Pete. To leave was to suffer, to lose a new family, and to hurt others as well. Mrs. Van Hoolen had wept bitterly when Mina disappeared. Of course, it wouldn't be the same sort of thing as far as he was concerned. He would write. In fact, he would write now, so that they would not be anxious about him. He tore a page from his school exercise book, and was reminded that he was also going to lose 30 blonde young friends with whom he had been happy. But the page was torn out, and ready. He wrote, "My dear Pete, I am going away. I am very sorry, but I must go. Mina is alive. I must find her. I don't know whether I will ever come back. I hope your parents will forgive me. They don't deserve this new trouble. They have always been so good to both of us. Tell them not to worry. I will write to you. My dear Pete, I give you all my love, and kiss Johanna for me. I will never forget you. Porphyros." He undressed and went to bed, intending to get again as soon as everyone was asleep. He knew it would not be long, for no one kept late hours on the farm. He waited half an hour, but, not hearing the sound anywhere, he got up and stuffed a few things into the small suitcase that was exactly the color of the Dutch meadows. Mrs. Van Hoolen had bought it for Mina the day of the parish fair at Croonen. He read over what he had written to Pete, unable to stop thinking of the pain he was bringing to them all, the Van Hoolens. And he added at the bottom of the page, "Tell Johanna to scratch Mosey between her horns." Mina loved to do that. His bedroom was on the first floor, and not very high up. Thick turf grew outside even in winter. There was no danger of being heard or seen if he were to jump, for the rest of the bedrooms faced the other way. He leaped into space, and landed unhurt on the wet grass. As he got up, he found that he was still reluctant. He knew quite well that it was wrong to leave like this. He and Mina had been sent to Holland because everyone thought they would be happy there. He was only a child, and had no right to take matters into his own hands. But what else could he do? Would they have understood? Mr. and Mrs. Van Hoolen were not his parents, and could not take full responsibility for him, and he just had to take this opportunity at once. As soon as he reached France, he would write to his own country, so that the authorities could see it was not just a silly escapade. He walked over the long dike, carrying his small green case. He had not even had to think up the plan, this one had come ready-made into his head. He was setting off amid sea breezes toward a new future and unknown territory, but his heart was untroubled. He was 13, he would find Mina. He had all his life before him. As he went thought deserted Croonen, he glanced in passing at his service station, where so many treasures were at rest behind the closed doors. The village was behind him now. He thought of Mina. She, too, had walked on into the night. Where had she been going? He walked on and on. The small case he carried made his arm ache, and he began to grow anxious. The truck might have gone by already. 11 strokes of a clock were brought to him on the wind. He came to a halt. He must have time to get back to the farm before dawn, if his plan came to nothing. Half an hour went by. At last, in the silence, he heard a heavy rumbling. It was the truck. He knew it at once by the driving lights on each side. Without any hesitation, he planted himself in the middle of the road, until the blinding arcs of the headlights came down on him like a fusillade. Then he waved his arms, without putting the case down, and went back to the side of the road to wait. The truck came on quickly, in spite of its colossal weight. Porphyrius wondered whether the driver had seen him. He went back and stood in the middle of the road, quite forgetting how a similar episode, on a certain road in Greece, had nearly ended tragically. The night was rent by the prolonged screeching of the truck braking and groaning to a standstill only a few paces from him. Two immense silhouettes tumbled on the vehicle. One of them came up to the boy, and, taking him the collar, shook him like a rat. "Are you crazy, standing in the middle of the road like that? You might have been squashed as flat as a pancake or thrown us into the ditch." The driver exploded in French, but Porphyrius understood every word. For some time now he had been making wonderful progress in the language. "Monsieur, I didn't realize I just had to. That's no reason for getting yourself crushed to a pulp. Where are you heading for?" "I don't know. I mean, if you want me to explain, let me go along with you, and I'll show you the place." "All right, then, hop in quickly." The man got hold of Porphyrius as if he were a loaf of bread and heaved him with his case into the cab so wide that it could easily have taken 4 people. There was a revving up of the engine, the clashing of gears, a turn of the wheel, and the truck was off. Porphyrius felt lost between the two giants. Were all Frenchmen so wide at the shoulder? The one in the trailer had given the impression of being rather slight. He tried to make himself small, very small, as he hugged his case close to him. "You don't seem to realize, lad," the driver went on grumbling, "that a truck like this can't pull up like a scooter." "I'm sorry," said Porphyrius, who had not understood word scooter. "And where do you want to be put down?" "Farther on a few more miles. I'll show you." Porphyrius would have been happy to spend the night in that well-warmed cab, in spite of the surly tone of the two men. But that was impossible. They would soon reach the frontier post, and what would these Frenchmen think if he admitted that he had no idea where he was going, and that no one was expecting him? They would say, "So you don't know? You just want to leave home?" "Oh no, not so fast." And they would put him down in the road. "No," He must go through with his plan to the very end. When they had gone 5 or 6 miles, he pointed to the outlines of a sleeping home set back a little from the road, and just showing in the darkness. Their in-island brakes screeched. The truck slowed down. Porphyros thanked the men warmly. "Good night, messers," he said in French, taking care to pronounce the words warmly. "Good A1," the 2 men replied, hoping to please the young Dutch boy. Porphyros slipped down from the cab and got out of the range of the headlights as soon as he could, but made no attempt to reach the isolated house. In the darkness, he began to run behind the long truck, which had already started off again. He threw his case onto the sacks of potatoes, so as to free his hands. Then, finding a stanchion to give him a grip, he heaved himself aboard. Now, just in time. The inside of the truck seemed huge, as if the sun of Greece were still warming his brain. He thought it as vast at the church at Simitra. How was he to find the place among these sacks? They were so closely packed it was impossible to slip a hand between them. Fortunately, right at the back the last row was incomplete. He made a little nest to himself, then a sort of corridor, so that he could stretch out. He smiled after all the excitement and the exhaustion. It was just as well that he had not climbed in here at once, when he had forced the truck to pull up. The drivers would have been suspicious. They might even have checked their load. Whereas now he could safely sleep as soundly as he liked. Sleep, yes, Porphyros wanted nothing better. His head pillowed on a sack of potatoes, he was deeply asleep before the wheels of the truck had revolved 100 times. When he awoke, dawn was breaking, the reluctant dawn, gray and unwashed. His back was sore, it felt as bruised as if he had slept on a heap of pebbles. It was not the coming of dawn that had snatched him from sleep, but a potato jerked out of a sack by a too sudden halt and descending upon his nose. How long had he been sleeping? Where was he now? He heard the cab door open. The sound of footsteps and voices drew near, and seemed to be coming toward the back of the truck. He shook in his shoes when a hand pulled back the canvas flap at the back so that light from outside filtered in. "Have you only these 230 sacks to declare?" "That's all." "Drive on." "Of course, the frontier, but which one?" They had spoken in French, so this must be France. He must have crossed the other frontier during the night, without his knowing it. France. It was odd, but he felt he had somehow drawn nearer to Mina. How far away Holland was now. This was the time the farm came to life. They would discover that he was missing. "Mrs. Van Hoolen, please forgive me," he thought. He grew colder in spite of the raincoat wrapped tightly around him. It grew lighter, and he wanted to know what this new country looked like. All he could see was the road streaming away from him between 2 rows of sentinels. Without such sentinels, all the roads in the world would be exactly alike. In this case they were tall, leafless poplars like those of Zealand. Was France like Holland? Then, if it was, they lied to him when they had talked about olive trees and even orange trees. The truck drove on, crossing mighty plains, traveling through towns that showed him only their pointed gray slate roofs, and small villages smelling of dung heaps. Paris, the town they said was so big and so beautiful, seemed a long way off. He would have been more patient if only his stomach had not begun to torment him cruelly. Then the truck slowed down and came to a halt. The 2 drivers got down. Porphyros could hear something being unscrewed. Of course, they were getting the tank filled. In spite of all his good resolutions, Porphyros succumbed to his consuming interest in garages. Were gasoline pumps the same in France? He crawled between the sacks, lifted his heap up like a snake, unbuckled one of the leather thongs that held the flap in place, and carefully lifted the thick canvas. Oh, what a sight! A dozen pumps stood in a row in front of a long and very new building, wonderful shining automatic gasoline pumps standing to attention, hose on shoulder. And the last splendid touch was that the man in charge of them, like the one at Janina, wore a uniform. Maybe it was not the glowing red tunic, but the blue overalls, adorned with a crest also to be found on the cap, were nevertheless elegant. And there was more than one uniform. Porphyros suddenly became aware of 2 other mechanics in the same get-up. As he was watching, one of them came forward to serve a motorist who had just drawn up at the pump next to the last. Porphyros lifted the canvas flap a bit more, then higher still, and craned his neck. A sudden oath made him jump. Turning his head, he saw a threatening finger pointing toward him. Too late for concealment, Porphyros. The gasoline pumps have just played the dirty trick on you. You little devil. So that's why you made us pull up in the middle of the night, is it? Just for a lark? With no mercy for the potatoes he was trampling over in his heavy boots, one of the two men, the bigger one, plucked the boy from his hiding place, pushed him roughly along, and forced him to get down into the road, where he stood shaking with fear and cold and hunger. I am so sorry. A fat lot of good that'll do, you little rascal. You've had a good run for your money, and now you're going to pay for it. Oh, please, mister, please listen, I didn't want that's enough. Then turning to the manager of the service station, he said, where's the nearest police station? On the way to Paris. It's at Verdiers, about 15 miles away. The police. Porphyros understood the word, and it made him afraid. When he was a very little boy, someone in Simitra had told him about a man who was hanged for stealing a basket full of melons from a field. I'm not a thief. I'm not. I haven't taken a thing. I only wanted to find my sister Marina. You can explain all that to the police. Now get up in the cab with us. And the truck set off again, leaving behind the imposing service station with its mechanics in uniform, while Porphyros, between his bodyguards, gave way to tears.